Okay, moving into the second turn of War for the Throne. The situation became a little unbalanced last turn. Red was clearly in the lead. These struggles, great struggle between green and blue, that's going to continue. But the shake-up between white and red, the first thing I did, when I do diplomacy, I kind of roll the dice to make decisions. It just, I come up with alignments that make sense in my mind, the first things I think of or whatever. Red and white kind of had an agreement last turn, so I gave them a 50% chance of maintaining that anti-black alliance. Let blue and green fight each other. It's working well for both of them. It didn't hold. Red's gaining the advantage here. It's not, a sure thing type of situation. So then the question became, well, what goes from that? And the next choice was white and black allying against red, since red's in the lead. That didn't work, but the next choice that made sense in my head was white really kind of hosed black. So red and black have made an alliance against white, actually. Now this is probably really pissing off white and maybe angering most players. Not sure to whom towards, maybe more towards black than towards red, because if you're the leading power and you get somebody to help you, well, everybody's still against you as the leading power. Sometimes that covers through, the feel of the game. If you were in the lead, you never really have anybody's trust again. But the fact that black would turn against white, who's obviously not in the best position, they're in the second best though, rather than against red, kind of makes them seem a little suspect to the other players. Anyway, that may end up driving red and black into a permanent alliance, which would be a bad thing indeed if they manage to wipe someone out. So that's where we are. We've dealt out the event cards. A few people have bought additional charms. Red bought one. White finally bought one. Blue finally bought one. Green chose not to. They want to keep their essence on hand because they think they can perhaps hold on to this space against blue. Blue has already pretty much said, all right, I can't win that. And, well, now we pay the supply points, and then we go to the action phase. Red built additional troops, marched into here against white. White spent all their essence, got a victory. In terms of their armor, did better, so they were able to actually push a couple of red units back into this space. They could have sent them somewhere else instead. They still have this problem, though, where they have to face this. There's an advantage to being in the lead in that you get to go first. Going first may not always be an advantage, but what we saw here, red would get to move in and attack and do their damage first, and take something away from the white player. So there's almost this snowballing effect to being in the lead because of it. So now, one of the other options is melee puts you in a position where you contest the territory no matter what. But what blue chose to do was to fire off a missile attack, not a sorcery because they're not far enough away. Both these spaces were only one away. A missile attack with 5 dice against this. It gives them more dice than they would have on a melee attack. Now green played this thing to give them an extra couple dice in their armor, melee, and missile rolls from that space. That's gone now. I should probably have some kind of marker to indicate that's green. Now blue has the opportunity to move in, and they don't have to do it with as many forces. They can shift just 2 in, for example, instead of having to shift such, the majority of their force in there. I guess I'll leave this in here. I don't have an easy way to mark who played these cards that take, that apply to a specific player. There aren't any kind of control markers or anything like that you can use for that. But yeah, that's blue's turn. Their primary action was an attack here. They can do a secondary here, try to defeat green, kill 1 unit. They had a card that would have allowed them to run away, but that would have been their primary action there instead of the missile attack or the land grab. They wanted to gain more territory. So I'll roll a secondary down here too. And we finish actions up. Green clears out their territory back here. They were hoping to advance into this space. They used a missile attack to try to do that. They didn't clear the area, so they couldn't move in as a secondary action. Black then landed here and ended up taking the space. And then white landed ships there as well to take it back. they built some troops. The biggest value in terms of spending money seems to be building up your army. That makes you, more difficult to conquer. That's the core of the game, I think, is keeping your army at good sizes, getting lots of free dice where you don't have to spend these essence shits, etc., because they are a potential victory condition. But all the other little factors kind of add in as these alternatives to attacking as a pure military, type of game, at least on a very abstract level. So anyway, white landed here. They were unable to defeat black because black used their charm card again. I'll flip that back over to save the unit. They had to not only pay an essence, but successfully roll. That's always an iffy thing, but it seemed like a good reason to hold an essence rather than play an extra defense roll. Ooh, I haven't rolled this attack yet. White was unable to get out of that space, and they don't succeed in an attack. I don't need to really roll black's defense because they don't have any cards that could help them if they win a defense. If they had white's ability, it would be kind of cool because they could chase that out and then own it. Well, now I'm at the point where I have to pay the treasury out, and I'll find out who the new first player will be, which I think will still be red. Red opened up with building up a large force, a primary action of a missile attack here. That was actually defeated, although they played a card which would have helped them. Blue played a lot of defensive dice. They used a card to do that, this hero, which doubles the effect of the essence spent to prevent themselves from losing that battle. Red probably should have advanced in as their primary event. I forgot about their special ability here, which then I remembered when they attacked white and ended up hurting white's forces. But they played this, which allows, which forces everyone else to have to roll 8s to succeed on any die rolls, and also takes the double success away from 10s. That's a powerful card. Basically, the entire world has allied, well, 3 players have allied against the 2 that had allied together. This may be a little looser than the red-black alliance. Black could have perhaps been convinced into this overall alliance, but they feel like their chances are best if they stick with red for a little while. There was no real attempt. White kind of wants to attack black, so there was no real desire to add them to this triple alliance. But red's got itself in a problem now because their missile attack failed, so now they want to make sure they don't pay overly on their replacement points, on their maintenance costs at the end of the turn. So they use secondary actions to move into some other areas so that they're paying less total cash. The more cash they have, the more troops they can raise, as long as they have areas. So black can't do that. Black can never raise troops because they don't own an area yet. Blue's turn was an interesting one. They gathered forces here, launched a sorcery attack against this with the Mansa in it, with the intention of moving in and capturing and reconverting that Mansa if they destroyed the units. They had a humongous number of dice, something like 9 dice available. Well, red played this card, which allowed them to shift 3 of those units, and they actually sent them out to sea to go attack some other area, essentially. This doesn't count as the primary action for the attacker. It's kind of this neat bonus. You could actually use this to help an ally get a second action. But in this case, they wanted to reduce their chance of losing their thing. Only really sorcery can affect it. Missiles could have from here. But blue's very good with sorcery. And now blue has the question, do they want to do a secondary action against white, which they wouldn't have done on their own, but now they could attack white. I'm going to say on a 1 or 2 they will, otherwise they'll agree to a peace with white, which white probably will not break. Well, they're going to go for it. They're going to make the attack, which kind of puts the blue-white agreement into question now. White was more interested in, hey, I've got peace so that I can deal with black and finish them off. And now they're being attacked by one of their allies, even though it wasn't the allies' choice. That's pissing them off. Green also did the same kind of thing, building up for a missile attack here, shifted some units in for secondary attack, secondary action. And, they're draining red's essence, but they're not gaining territories. They're not clearing red out of these areas. Whereas if they had shifted their troops in for a melee attack, they would force red to no longer, they would take the territories away from red. So they would no longer produce. So by not engaging in melee, by taking these kind of lower risk options that makes their territories better defended, they're also reducing their chance of actually taking the area away from red. Not taking the area. They actually had a better chance of taking the area because, for example, green can use more dice on a missile attack. So they spent for more. But with the odds increases, it's kind of tough. Blue was seriously considering building a Mansa until they saw, hey, I could maybe get this using a sorcery attack that I wanted to do. So they spent on troops instead. Green kind of followed suit with that. It's not working out terribly well. And now we go to black, who's really the weakest of the powers. I don't know what they're going to be able to pull off. Black and white kind of ended up in a stalemate situation as well. Black unable to do any damage to white, although they have spent essence down here. And white fired a missile attack into here. Red spent some points to try to avoid losing it. They succeeded in not taking any losses. And white also did its attacks in the locations where it's shared. No real changes anywhere. Again, white could have moved in here, but they didn't want to risk this because if they move in here, they might be losing this space next turn much more easily. So it's kind of these low-risk missile attacks or sorcery attacks. The comparison here is how much do you want to weaken yourself by making the more effective attack of actually charging in. Now, against red, that's especially dangerous because if red does a melee attack, he hurts you. He puts you on fire and he takes money away. So building up a defense and holding your region with more pieces when you're next to red seems important. Now we count up and distribute the money, etc. Largely this turn was a matter of stasis, but red managed to increase their own territory with this location, slightly. They also, through plays like this and through some of the other situations, well, not really, but through this play, managed to reduce the overall production of other players. And then they also played this, which halved Blue's money, that the cash income that they derived this turn. That might have been better to hold for another turn, but Red's kind of looking at, I'm going to make my stab now. I'm already kind of gaining a little bit, even though the world is against me. Black's not really my ally anymore in the same way. They're not going to attack me, but they're more just struggling for their own survival at this point. And, you know, this might be the time where I can sort of neuter blue. Now that might make black be my enemy, but as things stand right now, I've got the edge right here. I'm pulling in like 19 bucks in cash, which will allow me to build big armies and do big things with them. Of course, you can only kind of take one territory per turn. The exception to that, and here's where I see where the advantage to these are, they suck in 2 players, but they're pretty powerful perhaps in all others in larger number of players, which is these guys can fire into 2 areas. Okay, what does that mean? That means if they have a big pile of troops, they can launch ranged attacks against 2 different areas, wipe them out both, and then move in with secondary actions. So they can gain 2 territories per turn. It's not as weak a power as I first thought. I'm beginning to see the application of it. Red would love it, for example, if they could pick off 2 territories. That would be almost a snowball from hell at this point in terms of the victory, being able to gain victory very quickly, especially over at C. So yeah, I think all the abilities are kind of potent. Blues is kind of weird. It's very powerful in 2 players. I think it almost guarantees them the win, or blacks. I think it almost guarantees them the win because of the inner Cs. But having those water advantages, it's still a strength in multiple players, but I think it weakens somewhat. Likewise, Red's ability. Fighting the melees, well, everybody's kind of staying away from them, forcing them to take the war in, and using this missile attacks against them because of it, which I think kind of is an advantage there too. So it feels like there's a certain balance, even though, you know, each player has their own different powers. I'm going to load this one up. I believe red is still in the lead, so they'll be going first again next turn. And that's, like I said, it's a mixed blessing, because you go first, you get to attack first, you get to take something away from the enemies, but on the other hand, there's a reactive ability the later you go. White certainly was pleased to go last in terms of they didn't really lose. You know, you might not be the person who's losing anything. You might be in a position where by going last, you can make some choices. One problem with it all, seating order is fixed. So whatever advantages and disadvantages accrue from going first and second, or first and later in the turn, you know, for example, blue and green, who were opposed, were always fixed into that. The only exception would be if green was winning, they could take first away from blue. But otherwise, anybody else is doing better. Blue is going to have the advantage of going first, or whatever effects there are of that, and green is going to have whatever advantages there come from going later. That might affect your negotiations in the same sort of way that in an 18xx game, it affects what shares you want to buy or whatever. All right, I'm going to load this one up.